One introduction RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57 DMA 3rd 2025 Trump tax cuts for the rich and anti-Trump Labour wins Australian election. Episode 57 DMA 3rd 2025 CI fires doctor who pushed for mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations. 1 RAWSEP View. The editor of RAWSEP is aware of the firehose of information being forced on and directed at the American people since January 20, 2025. She hopes that as a representative of residents against wood smoke emission particulates, she is paring the Trump threat information down enough into manageable topics of air pollution from wood burning and other solid fuels and even fossil fuels first, and threats to general human health second, so that the reader or listener or viewer will be able to discern manageable patterns in threatening Trump actions, and so be able to inform the public about the threats and some deflections by protective forces employed by the United States Democratic Party of the harm these Trump threats are causing. Voters and potential voters for Democratic candidates need to get their ducks in a row or get their arrows in their quiver and take each arrow out and point their targeted critiques of Trump actions in a way that the arrow hits the target and stops the assault, one assault at a time if necessary. In this section that affect United States voters are the protective forces and actions are surprisingly and inspiringly employed by the Democratic with a small d parties of Australia yesterday, Saturday, May 2, 2025, and Canada on Monday, April 28, 2025, when both Democratic countries maintained their liberal democracies by re-electing as prime ministers both Liberal incumbent Mark Carney in Canada, whose Liberal Party won as a minority government, and Labour incumbent Anthony Albanese in Australia, whose Labour Party won in a landslide. In both cases, the firehose of Trump actions seems the deciding factor in getting out the Liberal in Canada and Labour in Australia vote against Trump-like policies. It is tempting to dwell on macro victories by liberal democracies and leave it at that and not have to deal with the detail of the firehouse of information about Trump threats, but Trump is employing the strategy of flooding the zone. Even a politics fanatic like the editor of RAWSEP is not used to dealing with multiple issues that threaten her own life in an existential way. If she might use such an elitist phrase, by now most people in the United States understand what an existential threat is, and a phrase it a threat to our very existence, our very life. That Trump threat is to the environment we live in, and to use a more down-to-earth phrase, the Trump threat is to the air we breathe and whether we will continue to breathe, because our present and future health is threatened. Also, our health is threatened by removal of the safety net of Social Security that provides the means of paying for food, shelter and clothing, the basic of life, as well as paying for health care that is needed to prolong life for most of us. Our health is threatened by removal of the safety net of our retirement accounts, by Trump tariffs that have broken the stock market where most of our retirement accounts are siphoned into, and the Trump tariffs have also broken the bond market where some of us who are less of risk takers have been fortunate enough to put some of our retirement money into. So the Trump threats to our rights to breathe clean air that will sustain our lives, and the Trump threats to our general health that will sustain us when faced with disease that strikes us alone, and when also faced with disease in the form of a pandemic that strikes many people at the same time, are back with us with a stupid unnecessary vengeance, because Trump is intent on reversing modern scientific and medical methods of coping with and reducing the harm from air pollution and disease. It must be said that these Trump actions are both stupid and unnecessary because they are reversals of modern scientific methods and medical methods which have sustained and saved lives in the recent past, as demonstrated by vaccines against COVID-19 and mask mandates when COVID-19 vaccines are not available. So we can divide the Trump threats into first in importance to RAWSEP threats to the environment through air pollution from stupid and unnecessary indoor residential wood burning, for instance, and with air pollution from other solid fuel burning and even from fossil fuel burning, although solid fuel burning is more polluting than fossil fuel burning, but both produce the threat to human health of PM 2.5 emissions. Secondly, Trump threats to modern scientifically and medically based health care, and thirdly, Trump threats to Social Security and retirement accounts by direct threats to dismantle the government safety net of Social Security, and also the Trump tariff threat to create the losing proposition to investing retirement accounts in both the broken stock market and the broken bond market. Air pollution, withdrawal of government funds from healthcare solutions, Trump tariffs that break the retirement account safety net of the formerly prosperous United States stock market and bond market. These are the Trump threats to the American people that concern RAWSEP. These are the Trump actions that galvanize the attention of governments and countries around the world and led to victories by voter actions for the Labour Party in Australia and the Liberal Party in Canada in the last week. We know what side we are on now and are unified as never before as liberal democracies with a small l and small d who are concerned with protecting the air we breathe, protecting our health and protecting the means by which we feed, clothe and house ourselves. The puny purpose of Trump tariffs and withdrawal of government funds from healthcare and Social Security is to fund tax breaks for the rich in America. This Trump goal is sufficiently outrageous to gain the attention of any voter, even if they are terribly disengaged from thinking about politics and the impact of politics on their own poor to modest to middle class income lives. The means to attain this puny Trump goal are varied, and it seems we have to pay attention to each attempt to con the average American out of their Social Security and retirement money. To begin with, we have to paint the con man Trump with the colors of shame and parade him through the public square, and then do it again and again every time Trump attempts to bilk the American people of their money and their lives in order to fund tax breaks for the rich. So this week, the victories in Australia and Canada by incumbents who pledge to clean the air and fund safety nets for people of all incomes. How are we doing in the United States this week? For the Trump side, firings are taking place, although employees may be reinstated when lawsuits are filed and judges force Trump to rehire workers. Most recently, the Trump CIA fired a top doctor who pushed mandatory COVID-19 vaccines in order to protect human health. This particular doctor is responsible for saving many lives. Hopefully a judge will order her reinstatement sometime in the future. This week, the incompetent head of the Trump Health and Human Services imposed a delay on COVID-19 vaccines scheduled or unscheduled for fall 2025 launch. Hopefully a judge will rule that additional unnecessary testing for COVID-19 vaccine safety is unnecessary because it has already been done exhaustively. This week, an authority on successful markets, Warren Buffett, spoke to his followers and defended the concept of global trade flows, which are not possible with the level of Trump tariffs in place now. Buffett announced he is retiring from Berkshire at the end of 2025. This week, a few Republicans voted with Democrats in the Senate to take away the emergency powers now assumed by Trump in order to impose his Trump tariffs. However, the necessary two-thirds majority vote threshold was not reached in order to overcome a Trump veto of the Senate action. 2A headlines: The New York Times, May 3, 2025. Trump actions opinion. The Trump nullos are basically predictable. The New York Times, Trump actions, the frightening precedents for the Trump legal abyss. The New York Times, Trump and medicine CI fires top doctor targeted by far-right activists. The New York Times, Trump tariffs, car prices expected to rise as tariffs on parts kick in. The New York Times, Trump tariffs, they help companies set prices. Tariffs are making it trickier. The New York Times, Trump tariffs, Warren Buffett criticizes the Trump trade policies. The New York Times, Trump tariffs, why OPEC Plus is increasing oil supplies despite falling prices. The New York Times, California, before the fire Ella tried to restore second reservoir in Palisades. The New York Times, Montana, in Montana, rare sight, Republicans and Democrats voting together. The New York Times, New Jersey, this state university has a plan to take on Trump. The New York Times, Australia election results, Prime Minister Albanese wins second term. The New York Times, to beat Trump actions, CI fires top doctor targeted by far-right activists. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency CI's Center for Global Health Services was dismissed a month short of qualifying for full federal retirement benefits according to a lawsuit submitted by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. The CI fired its top doctor after she was targeted by far-right activists who have worked to oust government officials they see as disloyal. According to a lawsuit filed Friday evening late last year, the CI recruited the Dr. Terry Aderim to take a top medical job as the director of the CI Center for Global Health Services. Within days, Ivan Raiklin, a far-right provocateur, accused her of being the architect of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate of the Pentagon. Dr. Aderim, 61, had served in a top medical role in the Defense Department in 2021 when Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III mandated that all service members receive a COVID vaccination. Raiklin, who has called himself the Trump Secretary of Retribution, is a former Green Beret who became an intense critic of the COVID vaccine. He published a deep state target list of 350 individuals he accused of treason. According to the suit, Raiklin also singled out Dr. Rajaram for criticism. Appearing on the Roseanne-Barr podcast, Raiklin accused Dr. Rajaram of genocide and mass mutilation for her support of the vaccine. In a since-deleted post on social media directed at John Ratcliffe, who had been chosen by Trump to lead the agency, Raiklin suggested that Dr. Rajaram was burrowing in at the agency, a term for political appointees taking civil service jobs. Raiklin is a close associate of Michael T. Flynn, the Trump First National Security Advisor, and serves on the board of directors of the Flynn Organization Future of America. Dr. Rajaram was told on April 4 that she was going to be fired. She twice asked why, but her supervisor said, "I have no information." The Dr. Rajaram firing is expected to be finalized Saturday, a month short of when she would have qualified for full federal retirement benefits. According to the lawsuit, plaintiff and her family suffer terrible injustice only because her good service to our country made her a target for a political extremist who defamed her and called for the termination of her employment and even her death, Carroll wrote in his complaint. The lawsuit says while serving at the Pentagon, Dr. Rajaram recommended to Austin that service members be given mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations, and notes it was in the tradition set by George Washington, who ordered the Continental Army vaccinated for smallpox in 1777. The good advice of the plaintiff saved the lives of American service members, Carroll wrote in the complaint. While several troops sadly died of COVID-19 in the early days of the pandemic in 2021, none died of COVID-19 after Secretary Austin adopted her recommendation and ordered armed forces vaccinated on deck. 11. Dr. Rajaram signed a renewable 5-year contract with the CIA. To see they help companies set prices. Tariffs are making it trickier. Pricing strategists are navigating the possibility that input costs, the economy, and consumer behavior may all shift drastically. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity. And relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. As companies scramble to respond to the Trump ever-changing tariff policies, some of the pressure has fallen directly on a tiny corner of the consulting world known as pricing strategy. It uses tools like customer research, historical data, economic modeling, and competitive analysis to recommend not only what price tag to put on items but how to structure prices to maximize revenue and profit. Often the work of a pricing strategist involves simulating how different pricing strategies and prices could affect sales, but brand rules and psychology can also come into play. It is part art, part science, and lately it has been trickier. Nobody knows how the Trump tariff policies will change, how those tariffs will affect the overall economy, or how consumers will adjust their spending as a result, all of which can be key metrics when determining pricing. One client that is heavily dependent on China for sourcing is considering how to respond to the Trump initial 10% tariff on the country. The minimum tariff rate for China is now 145%. In those early days, none of our models anticipated the current situation. 2D Warren Buffett criticizes the Trump trade policies. Trade should not be a weapon, he said at the annual shareholders meeting of Berkshire. Investors had been awaiting his comments on trade given the status of the conglomerate as an economic bellwether. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity. In relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. Warren E. Buffett took a shot at the Trump efforts to use tariffs to batter global commerce on Saturday as his $1.1 trillion conglomerate Berkshire Hathaway braced for potential hits from American trade policies. Trade should not be a weapon, Buffett said at the annual shareholder meeting of Berkshire, a perennially popular event that has been nicknamed the Woodstock of capitalism. I do not think it is right, and I do not think it is wise. The comments of Buffett were long awaited by the shareholders of Berkshire, tens of thousands of whom flocked to the hometown of Berkshire in Omaha to hear directly from the investor, particularly on the Trump trade policies. His comments on Saturday ended what had been months of Buffett maintaining a largely low public profile. The comments of Buffett were especially notable as the 94-year-old billionaire acknowledged that he had previously proposed an idea to help address trade imbalances, but on Saturday the Berkshire chief defended the broader concept of global trade flows. We should do what we do best and they should do what they do best, he said, drawing applause. Fears about the consequences of the tariffs have roiled markets and affected vast swaths of American companies. That includes Berkshire, which on Saturday reported a sharp drop in first quarter earnings. The company reported $9.6 billion in operating income, the preferred measure of Buffett, down 14% from the same time a year ago using generally accepted accounting principles. Berkshire reported a nearly 64% drop in net income. Largely because of paper investment losses, the company reported that a majority of its businesses had lower sales and earnings in the first 3 months of the year, particularly in insurance underwriting income, which was hit by losses tied to the California wildfires. In a regulatory filing on Saturday, Berkshire warned that the Trump trade policies were generating considerable uncertainty which could affect the operating results of Berkshire. A number of prominent corporate and business leaders were on hand on Saturday, including the Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, Tim Cook of Apple, which is one of the biggest stock holdings of Berkshire, and the billionaire financier William Ackman, two first-timers Hillary Rodham Clinton and Priscilla Chan, the wife of Chief Executive of Meta Mark Zuckerberg, were also present too. Montana and Montana rare sight, Republicans and Democrats voting together, derided by critics as the Nasty Nine and censured by the state party. A group of Republican state senators said they were simply advancing common sense legislation and supporting the agenda of the Montana governor. State Senator Wendy McCamey, one of 9 Republicans who worked with Democrats, keeps notes sent by Montanans thanking the group for its courage. Give them hell. A recent one read, which the editor of RAWSEP reads as a reference to a famous description of Democratic President Harry Truman, excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. In the waning days of a tumultuous legislative session in the capital of Montana, Carl Glimm, a state senator and a member of the ultra-conservative Freedom Caucus, watched with exasperation as yet another Democratic-backed bill zoomed toward passage. Are we not embarrassed? Glimm asked from the Senate floor in Helena. This thing is a big red no, but I will tell you what, it is going to be 23-27, he added, predicting his own defeat, because like we have said before, the cake is baked in deep red. Montana Republicans have controlled both houses of the legislature since 2011 and the office of the governor since 2021. They ousted the last remaining Democratic statewide official, former Senator John Tester, in November, which has made it all the more aggravating for conservative lawmakers to find themselves effectively in the minority this year. After an intra-party dispute in January, 9 Republican state senators began breaking with their caucus on key votes, siding with the 18 Democrats in the 50-person chamber. The result, a 27-person majority that has all but locked Republican leaders out of power. Some or all of the 9, as the Republican defectors are known, have voted with Democrats to reauthorize a Medicaid expansion, establish a child tax credit, increase access to maternal health care, and passed the state budget. They have helped block bills that would have weakened labor unions, made state judicial elections more partisan, and established an unlimited hunting season on wolves. On Wednesday, the final day of the session, they again broke with their party pushing through a property tax cut to assist residents struggling with soaring home values. I know we are in this new age where division is so hardcore, but why cannot we get back to where any reasonable legislation is reasonable legislation? If it is good for Montana, if it is good for your district, why not consider it? 2F New Jersey. The state university has a plan to take on Trump. 2 professors from Rutgers University in New Jersey went out on a limb to write a mutual defense compact for Big Ten schools. Their effort is gaining steam, excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, April 30, 2025. The conversation between 2 Rutgers University professors that lit a fire in U.S. higher education circles lasted only about 10 minutes. The professors, one teaches chemistry in Camden, NJ, the other psychology in Newark, said they were frustrated by the Trump abrupt cuts to research funding and its efforts to dictate policy on some campuses. They were also troubled by the lack of a unified response by university leaders. But what we have done is to focus on something that is within our control, to ally with each other. 2G Australia Prime Minister clinches second term in remarkable comeback. Heading to the polls amid global uncertainty arising from the Trump administration, voters opted for the known quantity of the incumbent leader Anthony Albanese. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity. And relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia has won a second term, completing a stunning turnaround for his governing centre-left Labour Party that trailed in the polls for months as a festering cost of living crisis weighed on voters. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the Australian public broadcaster, called the election for Albanese just a half hour after the last polls closed on Saturday. It was a resounding defeat of the Conservative opposition led by Peter Dutton. He began the campaign writing dissatisfaction with the status quo, but was hamstrung by a string of missteps and in association with some of the Trump messaging and policies. Dutton, the leader of the Liberal Party, also lost his parliamentary seat in the Conservative stronghold of Queensland, which he had held since 2001. His loss echoed the ouster of the Canadian Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, whose defeat was seen as a rejection of his embrace of Trump. Australia was the third major U.S. ally after Germany and Canada to hold elections since the Trump second term began in January. The Trump efforts to influence the vote in Germany did not appear to bear fruit in Canada. Mark Carney won another term on an anti-Trump platform, while Trump did not figure as prominently in the Australian election. The global turmoil unleashed by his administration has weighed on voters there. Neither camp mentioned Trump by name on Saturday night, but the nods to his influence were clear in his victory speech. An emotional Albanese said Australians had chosen to face global challenges the Australian way. We do not need to beg or borrow or copy from anywhere else, he said. We do not seek our inspiration overseas. Early in the campaign, Dutton had adopted some buzzwords or policies that echoed Trump, including denouncing what he characterized as wokeness and diversity initiatives. That strategy seemed aimed at righting the worldwide rightward anti-incumbent currents that dominated last year, but as the first months of the Trump presidency have played out, the association began to hurt. Dutton, Grandon 56, voted for the Liberal Party for decades but started backing Labour in the last election. The Trump tone of talking about issues was bleeding into Australian politics, he said on Saturday. This country has only gained from things like migration and international students that they have tried to make divisive, he said. Episode 57, Dep 1, What Do Teens Like to Do? 7 Day and 7 Ways to Make Yourself Happy, and 2 through 5 headlines. Main content 1, What do teens like to do? 7 Day and 7 Ways to Make Yourself Happy. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity. And relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. The 501c3 non-profit organization. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. Headlines trumpet an alarming trend. American teenagers are in the midst of a crisis. The rates of anxiety and depression have been rising for years, and many of the factors contributing to this unhappiness: the psychological toll of the COVID-19 pandemic, school shooting drills, climate change, social media, are ongoing. Amid all this gloom, I became curious about how teenagers have been sustaining themselves. 7 days and 7 ways to make yourself happy. When talking out loud to a rubber duck. Over the past year I have been teaching myself how to code for teenagers. A lot of things in the world feel out of our control right now. The way out of that is to actually make something ourselves. It is satisfying when my code works, but my favorite part is actually when it does not work, because that is when I talk to my rubber duck. Rubber duck debugging is a concept invented by engineers. Basically, when I am coding, I have a literal rubber duck next to me. When I run into problems, I turn to the duck and explain what I did step by step. To falling asleep on the phone with my best friend. One of my 2 best friends, Georgia, is a yipper. She talks so much. I am already a big talker and she brings it out in me. 3 Going fishing by myself. I can instantly tell you the thing that makes me happy. It is fishing. I like to think of it as an escape from reality. Every time I go out fishing, everything else disappears. A lot of stuff in my life has been structured for me. I wake up, have school, sports practice and homework. Fishing is a way for me to break the loop. Mostly I fish by myself whenever I can. 4 Listening to gospel music. When I feel weary or experienced out, I listen to gospel music. It uplifts me. 5 Watching jellyfish videos. Jellyfish are my favorite animals. They are one of the first animals to exist, and they are so simple. They have no brain, no bones, and are made mostly of water. When we In lockdown during the pandemic, I started to play jellyfish videos in the background during online school, and when I was doing my homework I especially liked to watch live streams like from the Monterey Bay Aquarium 6 twinning with my friends. I would not call myself a fashionista, but putting outfits together and expressing myself brings me joy. I love to go shopping or thrifting with my best friends and plan our outfits together so that we are matching. 7 Drawing maps and blueprints. In 6th grade I was recommended a YouTube video about car dependency, and ever since then I have been really into walkability and city planning. I have lived in the suburbs for my whole life, and it blew me away to learn about suburban sprawl and what happens when you build cities for cars instead of people. I started to draw transit maps. Right now I'm working on a master plan connecting one suburb to another and a map of how the Portland streetcar could expand to reach where I live. To RAWSEP view knowledge is power, and if the truth is out there, people will vote to have their economic problems solved. Those are comforting thoughts, but does finding out the truth really make people vote for their economic self-interest? Actually, lies are appealing to many people, and putting lies out there must be combated with the truth first, and then the truth must be repeated and repeated in many contexts, and then the truth must be explained and re-explained to people who are resistant to the truth. A narrative or story about the truth is the best way to present the truth to those who are resistant. Rewriting the bad ending to find and explain what would be a good ending, and showing the contrast between the results of a bad political policy and the results of a good political policy implemented in the future might also be persuasive to those resistant to the truth. 3A headlines. The New York Times, May 3, 2025. Trump actions CIA to cut over 1,000 staff positions using attrition. The New York Times. Trump actions. Trump considers executive order on college athlete payments. The New York Times. Trump actions. Trump seeks to eliminate the NEA. The New York Times. Trump actions. The Trump order targeting law firm Perkins Coie is unconstitutional. Judge rules. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. The Trump tariff on cheap Chinese imports will cost big tech billions. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Car prices expected to rise as tariffs on parts kick in. The New York Times. Trump and science and climate. Trump administration unveils EPA overhaul with shift to approving new chemicals. The New York Times. California. The new president of the University of California, James Milliken, will come from Texas. The New York Times. Massachusetts. The president of Harvard, Alan Garber, talks about his legal fight with Trump. The New York Times. Australia election 2025. Voters focus on cost of living concerns amid global turmoil. The New York Times. Ghana wanted a cathedral, it got an expensive hole instead. The New York Times. 3B. Trump and science and climate. Trump administration unveils EPA overhaul with shift to approving new chemicals. The New York Times. Out at the EPA. Independent scientists in at the EPA approving new chemicals. The Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin announced the agency was shifting its scientific expertise edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. May 2, 2025. The Environmental Protection Agency said on Friday that it would disperse scientists from its independent research office to other divisions, where they among other things will be tasked with approving the use of new chemicals. Administrator Lee Zeldin announced the changes to the EPA in a video, saying the agency was shifting its scientific expertise to focus on issues he described as mission essential. Most of the immediate changes will affect the Office of Research and Development, the EPA main research arm that conducts studies on things like the health and environmental risks of forever chemicals in drinking water and the best way to reduce fine particle pollution in the atmosphere. An internal document previously reviewed by the New York Times outlined the Trump recommendation to eliminate that office, with plans to fire as many as 1,155 chemists, biologists, toxicologists and other scientists working on health and environmental research. That did not happen on Friday, but the new priorities of the EPA were made clear. 130 jobs will be moved to an office at the agency tasked with approving new chemicals for use. Zeldin said chemical industry groups have long complained of a backlog in approvals, which they say is stifling innovation. The changes come amid a major deregulatory drive at the agency. The EPA under Zeldin is revising or repealing more than 30 regulations aimed at protecting the air, water and climate. The administrator also is overseeing an effort to dismantle the legal underpinning for most climate regulations, known as the endangerment finding. 4A headlines. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. Trump actions new climate superfund laws face widening legal challenges. The New York Times. Trump actions opinion climate change urgency has declined. The green transition has not. The New York Times. Trump actions. The Trump 2026 budget proposes cutting NASA funding by $6 billion. The New York Times. Trump actions. Trump gets a slow start on judges. After setting a record pace in first term. The New York Times. Trump actions groups for veterans object to the Trump proposal to rename Veterans Day. The New York Times. Trump and Science and Medicine. RFK Jr. orders search for new measles treatments instead of urging vaccination. The New York Times. Trump and Social Security. Trump asks Supreme Court to let DOJ view Social Security data. The New York Times. Trump tariffs stock market on track to erases losses from the Trump Liberation Day tariff rollout. The New York Times. Trump tariffs tame as stops shipping products from China to U.S. as Trump closes tariff loophole. The New York Times. Trump tariffs U.S. hiring stayed strong amid early days of tariff policy. Jobs report shows. The New York Times. Trump tariffs do not count the dollar out just yet. The New York Times. Trump tax cuts for the rich. Republicans wrestle with the Trump demands for tax cuts. The New York Times. Trump tax cuts for the rich. The Trump 2026 budget proposal calls for $163 billion in cuts. Live updates. The New York Times. United States. Ronan the sea lion is probably better than you at keeping a beat. The New York Times. United States and Science and Climate. Two scientific groups say they will keep working on U.S. climate assessment. The New York Times. United States and Science and Medicine. Universal anti-venom may grow out of man who let snakes bite him 200 times. The New York Times. United States and Science and Medicine. Well Festival livestream video and guest lineup. The New York Times. Massachusetts. Trump says he is taking away tax-exempt status from Harvard. The New York Times. Canada opinion. The world is watching Canada. The New York Times. Germany. Far-right is labeled extremist by the German intelligence agency. The New York Times. Ukraine. How Rubio proved himself as the Trump loyal foreign policy foot soldier. The New York Times. 4B new climate superfund laws face widening legal challenges. The Trump administration sued to block two state laws designed to force oil companies to pay the costs of climate change. Several other states are joining the fight to accept edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. May 2, 2025. Vermont made history last year when it enacted the first climate superfund law in the United States. It is designed to let the state recover money from fossil fuel companies to help pay the rising costs of climate change if the law can survive intensifying legal challenges. That is on Thursday. The Justice Department filed federal lawsuits against Vermont and New York, the only other state to have enacted a climate superfund law, arguing that the measures were a brazen attempt to grab power from the federal government and force others to pay for infrastructure spending by Vermont and New York. Hours later, the Attorney General of West Virginia, John B. McCuskey, announced that he was leading another challenge to the Vermont law, saying the measure would find coal, oil and natural gas suppliers of the United States into oblivion. McCuskey had already filed a similar lawsuit against the New York law, which seeks $75 million from oil and gas companies over the next 25 years. On Thursday, the Vermont version might be even more dangerous because it has no monetary cap untested in this context, like one about equal sovereignty between states, which is the idea that they should be treated uniformly by the federal government. She said it is kind of hard to predict how it all will go because we are looking at different layers here, a new kind of law and new kinds of challenges against that law. She said further challenges to more traditional state climate laws as well, such as New York and California. Measures that specify how much of a power supply for New York or California should come from clean energy are expected. 4C climate change urgency has declined. The green transition has not if the world is retreating from climate policy. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. May 2, 2025. Where does it leave the fate of the transition to clean energy and, for that matter, the future of the planet if climate urgency has cooled as a rapid but inadequate green rollout continues? Last year, worldwide spending on the energy transition was almost twice as high as it was in 2021, for instance, surpassing $2 trillion in many places. Green energy is tracking the exponential curves we consider vertiginous in other contexts in energy. They are often called S-curves, and for many technologies we appear to be on that fast takeoff phase. In the United States, Vox recently tallied wind capacity has grown more than 20-fold in 2 decades, and utility-scale battery capacity is up almost 30-fold in just 5 years. In Pakistan, nearly 5 times as much solar power was imported in 2024 as in 2022. The boom in Saudi Arabia has been even larger. Worldwide solar capacity installation more than doubled since 2022. In 2024, more than 90% of all new power installed globally was clean. These are 2 pretty different pictures which taken together give a confounding cross-eyed sense of the green transition. The 2 trends have, at least for now, decoupled, and whether we judge climate action to be on the march or in retreat depends on how the contradictory seeming trends balance out. It may also be a proxy measure for your relative faith in politics and in markets. On the one hand, there is the politics and rhetoric which I emphasized last week in the first of this 3-part climate politics temperature check. It would be extremely hard to imagine a major candidate for the American presidency in 2028 say building a campaign around climate as fully as Jay Inslee or even Bernie Sanders did in 2020, and it is just as hard to imagine any successor agreement to the Paris Accords, perhaps because the climate geopolitics of the last decade were a last gasp holdover of 1990s liberal internationalism. While those ideas may have already seemed anachronistic in 2015, they seem truly orphaned today. Those S-curves really are taking off, and it is not hard to imagine near future scenarios in which so much clean energy is coming online that truly consequential dirty energy is taken off as well. But more and more makes for especially sober reading as we watch the global relaxation of climate politics and consider the possibility that, having passed a local peak of environmental urgency, we may have to wait a while for the next one. What future is promised by our current form of decarbonization? Haphazard, politically fraught, breakneck in ways and halting in others. 4D Kennedy orders search for new measles treatments instead of urging vaccination. Decades of research have turned up no miracle treatment for measles, but studies show the MMR shot is 97% effective in preventing the disease. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. With the United States facing its largest single measles outbreak in 25 years, Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy Jr. will direct federal health agencies to explore potential new treatments for the disease, including vitamins, according to an HHS spokesman. The decision is the latest in a series of actions by the top health official of the United States that experts fear will undermine public confidence in vaccines as an essential public health tool. The announcement comes as Kennedy faces intense backlash for his handling of the outbreak. It has swept through large areas of the Southwest where vaccination rates are low, infecting hundreds and killing 2 young girls. On Friday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported more than 930 cases nationwide, most of which are associated with the Southwest outbreak. Critics have said Kennedy has focused too much on untested treatments such as cod liver oil supplements and offered only muted support for the measles vaccine, which studies show is 97% effective in preventing infection. The decision to put more resources into potential treatments rather than urging vaccination could have grave consequences. At the center of the outbreak, we do not want to send the signal that you do not have to get vaccinated because there is just a way to get rid of it, said Jennifer Nuzzo, an epidemiologist at the Brown University School of Public Health. Scientists have already thoroughly studied various vitamins and medications as potential treatments for measles, said Michael Osterholm, an epidemiologist at the University of Minnesota. Decades of research have turned up no miracle treatment for the measles virus, which can cause pneumonia, making it difficult for patients to get oxygen into their lungs, and brain swelling, which can cause blindness, deafness, and intellectual disabilities. It is not that there has been a lack of studies, he said. The Kennedy plan also assumed that beliefs of people about vaccines were fixed, when in reality clear information about their purpose and safety had encouraged thousands of vaccinations and past outbreaks. Despite the Kennedy claims that Mennonites have religious objections to shots because they contain fetus debris, historians who study the community say it has no religious doctrine that bans vaccination, and vaccine experts say there is no fetal tissue in the MMR shot. Local doctors have instead pointed to misinformation about the safety of the shot, which Kennedy has helped perpetuate as the primary reason their Mennonite patients opt their children out of. Vaccination for you. Republicans wrestle with the Trump demands for tax cuts. House Republicans are planning to include several of President the Trump campaign promises in the first draft of the bill, which they hope to release soon. Subsetted by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. It was easy to miss, but last weekend Trump floated a fundamental rewrite of the American tax code in a social media post, and again in remarks to reporters. Trump suggested the United States could stop taxing income under $200,000 and instead rely on revenue from his extensive tariffs. It will take a little while before we do that, but we are going to be cutting taxes, and it is possible we will do a complete tax cut, Trump told reporters on Sunday, because I think the tariffs will be enough to cut all of the income tax. The idea was news to Republicans on Capitol Hill, already in the throes of translating the Trump impulses for cutting taxes into law. Senator Mike Carney, a Republican from Idaho who leads the Finance Committee, said he had not heard from Trump or his staff about the proposal, so I just do not know what that is referencing. He said Republicans are using a special procedure called reconciliation to pass the tax legislation without Democratic support. Reconciliation requires lawmakers to follow a series of rules, one of which is that bills considered under the process cannot affect finances of Social Security. To work around that prohibition, House Republicans, rather than directly changing how Social Security benefits are taxed, are preparing to offer a more general tax break to older Americans. Already Americans over 65 are eligible for a slightly larger standard deduction, and Republicans have considered a further expansion if we can do a deduction that erases the tax burden that our seniors pay on their Social Security income for people within a certain income threshold. It equates to the same thing, said Representative Nicole Malliotakis, a New York Republican and member of the Ways and Means Committee. It is eliminating their tax burden. For if Trump proposes slashing domestic spending to the lowest level of the modern era, the Trump $1.7 trillion discretionary budget blueprint would cut $163 billion for the 2026 fiscal year, offering an outline of his vision for Washington and dramatically curtailing the role and reach of the federal government. Subsetted by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. Trump on Friday proposed slashing $163 billion in federal spending for the next fiscal year, a dramatic reconfiguration of the United States government role and reach that would eliminate a vast array of climate, education, health and housing programs, including some that primarily benefit the poor. The Trump discretionary $1.7 trillion blueprint illustrates his conservative vision for Washington and formalizes the disruptive reorganization that he commenced upon returning to office, a campaign that has already shuttered entire agencies and dismissed federal workers without the explicit approval of Congress. The 2026 budget proposal recommends stunning cuts across nearly every major agency that would reduce overall domestic spending to the lowest level of the modern era. House Speaker Mike Johnson swiftly endorsed it. Our country cannot continue to bear the hard consequences of years of runaway spending under Democratic leadership, he said, and this budget makes clear that fiscal discipline is non-negotiable. Here is what else to know: major health cutbacks. The budget proposes massive cuts for the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Budget includes $500 million for the Health Secretary Kennedy Jr. signature initiative, Make America Healthy Again. The CDC budget would be cut by more than half to $4 billion from roughly $9 billion. Slashing education spending. For education would fall by $12 billion under the Trump 2026 blueprint, with the most significant cut coming from a plan to streamline Title I money for high-poverty schools and other K-12 programs. Climate change. The proposal would dismantle many government programs to study and mitigate global warming. Proposes sweeping cuts to climate and renewable energy programs. It would cut funding for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, one of the premier centers for climate science in the world, by roughly a quarter, and would slash $4.7 billion from the Department of Energy, aiming at programs related to renewable energy and climate change. The proposal also aims to cancel roughly $15 billion in clean energy funding from the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure bill. The proposal would also reduce the Department of Energy annual budget by 9.4% or $4.7 billion, mainly by cutting programs related to renewable energy and climate change. Even more significantly, the proposal aims to cancel cancel roughly $15 billion in clean energy funding that the Energy Department received under the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure bill to spur new technologies that could help reduce planet-warming greenhouse gases. The cuts would mean pulling back on funds intended to encourage battery manufacturing to develop technologies to remove carbon dioxide from the air and to expand electric vehicle charging. In a document accompanying the blueprint, the Trump administration said the proposal eliminates funding for the Green New Scam, using the Trump catch-all phrase for the climate policies of former President Biden. Under Biden, the federal government sought to promote technologies like solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles to help reduce emissions, but the Trump administration said it would end many of those programs, calling renewable energy unreliable and arguing that a $6 billion program to build electric vehicle chargers was wasteful and ineffective. Instead, agencies would focus on promoting fossil fuels like oil and gas, as well as technologies like nuclear power. The Biden administration has already awarded most of the clean energy funding authorized under the infrastructure law to different companies, such as $7 billion to create hubs for hydrogen fuels and $6 billion to help industrial companies reduce their emissions. But not all of that money has actually gone out the door, and lawmakers have for months been speculating that the Energy Department might try to cancel or pull back funding awards. That has prompted a fierce lobbying battle to save projects. Other environmental agencies would also see steep cuts under the Trump proposal. Proposed budget change by agency-based discretionary funding: billions PCT state and international programs -$49.1 -84%, National Science Foundation -$4.9 -56%. Environmental Protection Agency -$4.9 -54%, Housing and Urban Development -$33.5 -44%, Labor -$4.7 to 35%, Small Business Administration -$0.3 -33%, Interior -$5.1 -30%, Health and Human Services -$33.2 -26%, NASA -$6.0 -24%, Treasury -$2.7 -19%, Agriculture -$5.0 -18%, Commerce -$1.7 -17%. Education -$12.0 -15%, Justice -$2.8 -8%, Social Security Administration +$0 +0%, Energy +$1.3 +3%, Veterans Affairs +$5.4 +4%, Transportation +$1.5 +6%, Defense +$113.3 +13%, Homeland Security +$42.3 +65%. Proposed budget change by agency-based discretionary funding change 2025 to 2026 billions. Percentage change: state and international programs -$49.1 -84%, National Science Foundation -$4.9 to 56%, Environmental Protection Agency -$4.9 -54%, Housing and Urban Development -$33.5 -44%, Labor -$4.7 -35%, Small Business Administration -$0.3 -33%, Interior -$5.1 -30%, Health and Human Services $33.2 -26%, NASA -$6.0 -24%, Treasury -$2.7 -19%, Agriculture -$5.0 -18%, Commerce -$1.7 -17%, Education -$12.0 -15%, Justice -$2.8 -8%, Social Security Administration +$0 +0%, Energy +$1.3 +3%, Veterans Affairs +$5.4 +4%, Transportation +$1.5 +6%, Defense +$113.3 +13%, Homeland Security +$42.3 +65%. Note: amounts include budget changes the administration is anticipating from the reconciliation process. The proposed budget would abolish a CDC center that studies how to prevent injuries, suicides and homicides, including those deaths caused by firearms. It was one of several CDC centers eliminated by the proposed budget, which cut CDC funding by about half. The Trump budget calls for deep cuts to public health programs and research. 4G2 scientific groups say they will keep working on U.S. climate assessment. The organizations said they would publish the work of researchers even after the Trump administration decision to dismiss all authors on the project. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission. Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. Major science groups said Friday that they would publish work for the United States flagship report on climate change, a project that the Trump administration threw into limbo by dismissing hundreds of scientists who had been working on it. The American Geophysical Union and the American Meteorological Society said they would publish work originally meant for the assessment in their journals should the authors choose to do so. This collaboration provides a critical pathway for a wide range of researchers to come together and provide the science needed to support the global enterprise pursuing solutions to climate change. The National Climate Assessment is a comprehensive review of the latest climate science that gauges how climate change is affecting the country and what can be done to adapt and mitigate its effects. There have been 5 published since 2000. The 6th edition was scheduled to be published in early 2028. The new effort would not replace the federal report, which is congressionally mandated. The statement from the American Geophysical Union and the American Meteorological Society said the German intelligence agency labels far-right as extremist. The designation is certain to inflame debates over whether the party should be banned, though some polls show it to be the most popular in the country. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission. Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, May 2, 2025. The German Domestic Intelligence Service has classified the far-right Alternative for Germany, which some polls show as the most popular in the country, as an extremist party. The German authorities announced on Friday the decision intensifies a quandary for Germany about what to do about the party known as the AfD, whose leaders have trivialized the Holocaust, revived Nazi slogans and denigrated foreigners, all the while expanding their political base. The designation is certain to inflame a long-running debate over whether German lawmakers should move to ban the party altogether. Such a step could cast Germany into a political crisis without necessarily resolving how to bring the estimated 25% of the electorate that supports the AfD into the mainstream political fold. The issue now threatens to become a distraction for Friedrich Merz, whose standing has fallen as the AfD has risen in recent weeks, even before he is sworn in as Chancellor, which is expected on Tuesday. Though the AfD finished second in elections in February with 28% of the vote, Merz and his conservative Christian Democratic Party joined other mainstream parties in a pledge to shun the AfD as too extreme to govern. Instead, Merz turned to the center-left Social Democrats as a coalition partner, increasing the sense of disenfranchisement among AfD voters. AfD leaders condemned the announcement on Friday as a politically motivated attempt to undercut their party and said they would challenge it in court. The AfD now forms the biggest threat to the German establishment parties, which have seen their decades of dominance over politics eroded as the German political landscape has fractured. Among other things, the AfD pointed to the timing of the decision, characterizing it as a parting shot by the Interior Minister Nancy Faeser, a left-wing Social Democrat, just days before she is to be replaced in the Merz new government by Alexander Dobrindt, a mainstream conservative. Before the Friday announcement, the Domestic Intelligence Agency had classified the youth wing of the AfD as extremist in 2023. The party has since disbanded it. The new classification gives domestic intelligence more tools to monitor the AfD. It also opens a legal avenue to have the Constitutional Court ban the party, a step that the German top court has taken only twice in the 76-year history of the German modern constitution, both times with parties far less popular than the AfD. 5A headlines The Guardian, May 2, 2025. Trump actions. 100 days in. Trump faces a problem he can reach but he cannot govern. Jonathan Friedland, The Guardian. Trump actions. Trump signs executive order to cut funding for public broadcasters. Trump administration. The Guardian. Trump actions. We have never seen a more error-prone, incompetent presidency. Mustafa Bayoumi, The Guardian. United States and Kentucky Derby horses helped shape the world as we know it. Now we run them to death. Kentucky Derby. The Guardian. Canada has long been seen as the cool cousin next door. Here is the truth. Noel Ransom, The Guardian. Canada narrowly missed a far-right prime minister, but we are not in the clear yet. Teo Barrow, The Guardian. Canada. The Trump chaotic threats won Mark Carney the Canadian election. but only just Colin Horgan. The Guardian. Australia and a climate election. The coalition wants to take Australia backwards while Labour is standing still. Adam Morton. The Guardian. United Kingdom and Trump like UK. Politicians' support for reform has surged. What does this mean for UK politics? The Guardian. United Kingdom and Trump. The truth is finally dawning on Britain. Toadying to Trump has got us nowhere. Emma Brockus. The Guardian. 5B Canada. Mark Carney is no antidote, just a bandage. Canada has long been seen as the cool cousin next door. Here is the truth. The country has exported a myth of progressivism. It is time to confront who we really are. RAWSEP view. Like Democrats in the United States, when Liberals in Canada are unpopular for no rational reason and Liberals are asked to change, Liberals already offer better social benefits than Conservatives offer, which should make Liberals in Canada popular with poor to middle-class voters who are concerned about the cost of living. However, the online television and billboard propaganda put out by Republicans in the United States and Conservatives in Canada seems too effective in persuading voters to vote against their own economic interests. Political parties should not cross-examine themselves relentlessly if voters act irrationally. Trump outrages against Canada allowed Liberals to win in Canada. Canadians should thank their lucky stars that Carney won, since the majority of voters will win economically for the next 4 years because of the Carney win. Wait 4 years before blaming Carney for whatever Conservatives serve up as propaganda for the next 4 Conservative losing years. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organization. The Guardian. May 2, 2025. Canada has been canonized safely. Predictably, it is the great grave story we have exported, retold in economic rankings, stitched into tourism ads, held up in classrooms and cable news panels. We are the cooler, mellower cousin next door, the country that has it figured out, where healthcare is universal, democracy is common, diversity is politely managed. Myth-making cannot save us if we want to hold on to our sovereignty in this moment. Maybe it is time we stop lying like them to others and most of all, to ourselves. 5C The Trump chaotic threats. 1 Mark Carney. The Canadian election, but only just. This was a vote against illusions of a 51st state and economic warfare rather than an endorsement of the Liberal Party policies. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organization. The Guardian. April 29, 2025. Yesterday, as Canadians went to the polls, the U.S. President Trump suggested that if Canada became part of America they could vote for him instead, but in truth Canada becoming the 51st state was not a prerequisite for Canadians to vote on Trump. It was Trump who set the stakes of this election anyway, beginning almost as soon as he took office. His threats against Canada, economic and existential, were the backdrop of this campaign. An unexpected crisis on our doorstep, and now the Liberal Party led by Mark Carney has won a 4th term in office, a result that would have seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. Before the Trump unprecedented intervention, Carney placed this issue at the center of his campaign, painting himself as a reluctant but competent anti-Trump savior. Canada may not be broken as Wally ever once declared. The Carney job now is nothing short of helping Canada ensure that it cannot or will not ever be 5D a climate election. The coalition wants to take Australia backwards while Labour is standing still, depending on where things end up after Saturday. The biggest climate push may come from the crossbench. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organization. The Guardian. May 2, 2025. If further confirmation was needed that the Peter Dutton-led coalition would take Australia aggressively backwards on dealing with the climate crisis, his final election costings released on Thursday tell the story in black and white. The Liberal and National parties plan to gut programs designed to cut emissions and help create green industries to give the country an industrial future as demand for fossil fuels falls. They also plan to ignore advice that Australian nature is in poor and deteriorating health and strip back already limited funding for environment programs. On the evidence we have, they propose nothing to take their place. The sole climate-related idea on the table is a widely mocked plan to boost coal and gas-fired power for the next 2 decades and eventually build taxpayer-funded nuclear plants, with the Climate 200 fundraising body having identified 35 campaigns as worthy of support, including in regional electorates where independents came from nowhere to nearly win last time. There is also a scenario in which a shift away from the established big parties becomes even more entrenched. If that happens, it will mostly be towards individuals who want more focus on the issue not less. We may come to think of this as a climate election. After all, 5e support for reform has surged. What does this mean for UK politics? And what lessons should Labour and the Tories learn after a chastening night? RAWSEP US Streeting is the 42-year-old Secretary of State for Health and Social Care since July 2024 and is a member of the Labour Party. The writer of this article suggests switching the 62-year-old current PM of the UK. Keir Starmer for West Streeting. West Streeting would be a gay younger PM from the working class East End of London who was raised by a single mother. Nigel Farage of the Reform Party is a 61-year-old who has been living separately from his second wife for 8 years. The editor of RAWSEP does not think swapping West Streeting for Keir Starmer will be advantageous for the Labour Party in Britain in any particular way, and that swap is only mentioned in a joking way in this article. How Labour could improve their position with voters is not seriously explained in this article, unfortunately, except edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organisation. The Guardian, May 2, 2025. Switch out Keir Starmer for Streeting and all our troubles will be over. They are missing the bigger issue with Nigel Farage, and reform have his momentum and, more importantly, a coherent story about what is wrong with Britain and what must happen to fix it. Until Labour has a competing story that connects with the public on an emotional level, it will continue to flounder. Farage launched his local election campaign riding into a rally on a JCB tractor like Trump was photographed in a dump truck and talking about potholes. He ended his speech with a 5-year plan to get reform into government. Labour needs to be similarly bold in setting out a vision and as effective in communicating it. 5F The truth is finally dawning on Britain. Toadying to Trump has got us nowhere. Jolly humoring and kind words guarantee nothing from this White House right now. Walmart has more clout than the UK, except edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organisation. The Guardian, May 1, 2025. Trump has probably stiffed the UK into a second or third-tier boarding group for trade talks behind South Korea and Japan. The phrase British negotiators are hopeful followed almost immediately by use of the word disappointed in heavy rotation takes you back to every toxic relationship in which you have played Britain to the America of someone else. We are talking of course about the wisdom or otherwise of appeasing a man many think of as a tyrant, and the UK pretzels itself to fit the Trump requirements, but it will not make any difference. It is a rule of extortion that demands will increase with each capitulation. Balmoral is a mid-list palace that, while superior to Blenheim, which Trump visited in 2018 and is basically an off-site for corporate events these days, is decidedly not Buckingham Palace. A subtlety we must assume the king and his cohorts are thoroughly enjoying, and Trump has no idea about whatsoever anyway. Where does any of this leave the UK? For now at least, belligerence seems to be getting the better results with Trump, at least for those negotiators who have something he wants. Trump has blinked repeatedly when faced with the negative consequences of his own erratic behavior, be that from tech companies forcing him to exempt them from tariffs or business leaders persuading him in the wake of his commitment to putting 145% tariffs on Chinese goods to waddle and admit they are not sustainable. The poker face of Britain as a piece of canny diplomatic coolness and blithe UK negotiating could be the uncertain actions of the UK party in an abusive relationship with the US. The UK understands that the moment of greatest danger is when you try to leave the US. 6A headlines. Other media. May 2, 2025. Trump tariffs. The rapid rebound of the stock market from tariff-inspired drought stuns Wall Street, but there were signs this would happen.
Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Hi, I am Leone. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies which we will post for her here. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your neighborhood epidemiologist. The Mados Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times. One introduction. RAWSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM2.5, and PM2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.